Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, hope you've all been doing well. In this video, I'll be showing you guys some gameplay of Gears of War 4 on the PC, and talking about how it runs on my gaming PC, which has some mid-level hardware. I'll leave some timestamp links down below in the video description, so if you want you can skip ahead in the video to a specific part. Now, I already had uploaded a video which showed the in-game benchmark running at 1080p and 1440p at ultra settings, and while the results were quite satisfying, however, I know some people would much rather see some actual gameplay footage, since sometimes the in-game benchmarks don't always reflect what a real-world scenario will be like. This video will actually be focused on the campaign, as I did notice quite the variation in performance from both sections of the game. Now before I continue, I'll give you guys a quick rundown of the specs for my system, and the settings I'll be testing the game at. I'm using an Intel Core i5 6600K, which has been overclocked to 4.6 GHz, paired with 16 GB of G.SKILL Ripjaws V-Series DDR4 memory, clocked at 2800 MHz. For the graphics card, we've got an MSI Radeon R9 390, running at a graphics core clock of 1060 MHz and 1525 MHz to the VRAM. The full specification list for my system can be found down below in the video description. I also had the game ready drivers installed from AMD, Crimson 16.10.1. Moving on to the settings, here you guys can see that I have pretty much everything set at Ultra. These are actually the same settings that I used with the in-game benchmark. So yeah, we're almost maxed here except with the exception of VSync and motion blur for obvious reasons. So let's finally jump into the performance overview, starting with 1080p. Oh, and I apologize guys for the choppiness of the video. Since this is one of those unified Windows platform games, or whatever it's called, I couldn't record the game with just a game capture scene preset from OBS. It just doesn't work, and I have to use monitor capture or display capture. I'm honestly not sure as to why that is, but this is what I've been experiencing with most of the UWP games. But this game actually in particular doesn't really stutter. That's mostly the fault from encoding. So looking at this scene here, where you have to defend the village from a bunch of DBs, you're posted outdoors, so there's quite a lot going on here. In this area, you will immediately notice that the frame rate tends to be all over the place. At one point, it will be in the low 80s, and then all of a sudden it can drop into the high 60s, and then spike all the way up into the low 100s. However, for the most part, I noticed that the average frame rate was around 80 FPS. Therefore, in areas with a lot of enemies, explosions, and gunfire particles, you will be able to attain a relatively high frame rate, significantly higher than that 60 FPS mark. I can't run anything like Fraps, so I actually wasn't able to benchmark it on my own, but you should be able to tell that just by looking at the numbers here. Looking at the next area where the setting takes place at night, I noticed a considerable drop in performance here. This is due to the shadows, the lighting effects from the moon, and the reflections. I felt a lot of those features were more emphasized due to the nighttime settings, which therefore leads to a drop in performance of about 10 FPS or so. If you take a look at the frame rate counter down below on the right, you can see that the frame rate is dropping into the 60s frequently, whereas during the daytime level that wasn't the case.
No, it wasn't. I got a lot of happy memories of this place.
Wish I could say the same.
In this scene, the intensity and action really picks up, and the average frame rate is around the mid-60s and it rarely drops into the high 50s. In indoor areas, you guys can see that for performance is dramatically better. Here, the frame rate actually stays at around 100 FPS, and sometimes goes even above that. Therefore, at 1080p, one can expect a solid experience. You will be able to maintain a steady and smooth experience regardless of whatever area you're in. Also, for those of you with high refresh monitors, Gears of War 4 will be very fun to play at this resolution. Alright, now when we bump the resolution to 1440p, what happens? Here we're looking at about 56% increase in pixel count, and despite that, the game performs very well. In this area here, you guys can see that the average frame rate stays in the mid-50s, sometimes going into the 60s. Again, there's still quite a bit of variation in frame rate, but it's still very playable. Moving into an indoor area, the performance exhibits a similar behavior as what we saw at 1080p. The frame rate stays around the mid-60s for the majority of the time, and occasionally increasing into the 70s. Moving on to areas in the nighttime settings, the average frame rate decreases to around 40 to 45 FPS here, probably due to the reasons I mentioned earlier, but still nothing that is game breaking. So even at 1440p, Gears of War 4 will run great on a system that consists of mid-range hardware. With the frame rate near 60 FPS for most areas, you can still attain a smooth and playable experience. And that's quite impressive considering how great this game actually looks. Also, keep in mind that this level of performance was achieved with basically everything set to Ultra, so I'm sure with a few compromises and with a mixture of high settings, you should be able to increase the average frame rate. In the campaign, I like to enjoy the game at 1440p, and in multiplayer, I bring the resolution back down to 1080p, but I'll save that for another video. So that pretty much covers this overview I had of Gears of War 4's campaign at 1080p and 1440p. I'm actually very impressed and quite surprised actually as to how the game ran. I mean, just recently with the release of Forza Horizon 3, which was plagued with performance issues, I was skeptical about how the game would run, although it looks like the exact opposite happened here. We were given a game that ran phenomenally, and to be quite honest, this was actually one of the most optimized games I had seen on PC this year in general. I'm not just talking about UWP games. Alright guys, let me know if you have any thoughts or comments. Like this video if you found it enjoyable and informative, and if you want to see more videos like this, then hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.